I'm talking, of course, about Grace O'Malley. You've probably heard of her as the Pirate Queen of Ireland, right? This larger-than-life, swashbuckling leader who commanded entire fleets and absolutely ruled the waves. I mean, the legend is it's huge. It's all about rebellion, daring raids, and this fierce, unbreakable independence. But here's the thing. Is that the whole story? Was she really just a pirate? To get to the truth, the real woman behind the myth, we've got to peel back those layers of folklore and really dig into the world that made her who she was. So, to understand Grace, you have to understand her time. She was born smack in the middle of a really pivotal and, frankly, violent moment in Irish history. It was a time when two profoundly different cultures were, well, they were on a collision course. And this slide, it really shows you the fundamental clash at the heart of her world. So on one side, you've got Gaelic Ireland. Think of it like a patchwork quilt of independent clans. Each one has its own chieftain, and they're all connected by these complex systems of tribute and alliances. Then, on the other side, you've got Tudor England, a massive, centralized power. And they've got one goal: conquer and anglicize the whole island. They're pushing policies like surrender and regrant, which was basically a way to get rid of Irish chieftains and replace them with English-style lords. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understanding Grace's story. It's all about something called Brehon law. See, under English common law, when a woman got married, all her stuff, it became her husband's. Poof, gone. But not under Gaelic law. No way. It allowed women to be incredibly independent. We're talking owning their own fleets, controlling their own lands, even leading their own followers. This legal system, it's the key. It's the reason a woman could rise to become such a powerful chieftain in the first place. And let's be clear, Grace didn't just inherit her power and sit back. Oh no, she built it. She forged it through smart, shrewd alliances, her incredible skill as a sailor, and just an absolutely unbreakable will. So let's quickly trace her path to power. She's born into this famous seafaring clan, right? Her first marriage, totally a strategic alliance. But here's where it gets interesting. When her husband dies, she doesn't just fade into the background. Instead, she gathers up her most loyal followers, goes back to her own lands, and sets herself up as an independent leader. Then, her second marriage to Richard in Iron Bark, another brilliant calculated move. Why? Because it gave her control of one of the most strategic castles on the entire coast. And there's this great story that just perfectly captures her personality, even as a kid. The legend goes that she wanted to sail with her father, but he told her no. Her long hair would get tangled in the ship's ropes. So what did she do? She just chopped it all off. Bam! That's how she earned the nickname Grania Mowell, or Bald Grace. It just goes to show, from day one, she was not going to let anything stand in her way. And this is Rockfleet's castle. This place wasn't just a home for her. You have to think of it as the nerve center, the headquarters of her entire maritime empire. From right here, she controlled the waters of Clew Bay. She ran all her operations: trade, mercenary work, and yep, piracy. She was basically charging tolls from any ship that wanted to pass through her territory. But of course, when you're that powerful and that independent, you make enemies. And Grace's success put a giant target on her back for the English crown. This inevitably led to a massive showdown with one of Queen Elizabeth's most ruthless officials. So let's meet the villain of our story, Sir Richard Bingham. And this quote from him, it tells you everything you need to know about the guy. The Irish were never tamed with words, but with swords. Yikes. As the new English governor of Connacht, his entire mission was to crush the Gaelic way of life and force chieftains like Grace O'Malley to submit by any means necessary. And Bingham's war on Grace wasn't just political, it was personal, and it was brutal. He systematically tore her livelihood apart, confiscating her ships, her cattle, everything. But then he crossed a line. He went even further. He murdered her eldest son and threw her other sons and her half-brother in prison. He was pushing Grace to the absolute brink. Okay, so picture this. She's been stripped of her wealth, her fleet is gone, and her family's lives are hanging by a thread. What does she do? Well, Grace O'Malley decides to make the single most audacious, most daring move of her entire life. So I have to ask you, what would you do in that situation? When the Queen's own governor is hell-bent on destroying you? Well, if you're Grace O'Malley, you don't back down. You go over his head. Her plan? Appeal directly to Queen Elizabeth I, herself. I mean, Just stop and think about the sheer guts that took. First, she has to answer this formal list of 18 questions from the court. Then she sails straight into London, the heart of enemy territory, to get a personal audience with the one person in the world who could stop Bingham. And let's make no mistake, the risk here was immense. This wasn't some unknown person showing up. The English court knew exactly who Grace O'Malley was. To them, she was the nurse to all rebellions, a notorious troublemaker for 40 years. She was literally walking right into the lion's den.
So the meeting happens, and it is the stuff of legend. You have these two incredibly powerful women, both absolute rulers in a man's world, and they're speaking to each other in Latin. Then comes this just stunning moment. Grace, the chieftain of the O'Malley clan, refuses to bow. She doesn't present herself as a subject. She presents herself as an equal sovereign to the Queen of England.
And you know what? Incredibly, the gamble worked. It actually paid off. Queen Elizabeth was apparently so impressed that she agreed to Grace's terms. Her son and brother were to be released, her property was to be returned, and she was even given permission to continue her maintenance by land and sea, her way of life. In return, Grace pledged her forces to fight for England. It's just unbelievable. She had won. So, after this entire lifetime of fighting and negotiating and just surviving, how do we remember Grace O'Malley? Well, as you might guess, her legacy is every bit as complex as her life was. You know, what's really fascinating is that for centuries, if you picked up an official Irish history book, you barely find her name. And the argument was that she wasn't a nationalist hero. She was a pragmatist, a survivor. Everything she did for her own clan, for her own family's interests, not for some grand unified Ireland. But I love this quote from her biographer, Anne Chambers, because it just hits the nail on the head. Legends are not created about insignificant people. The fact that her story survived so powerfully in folk memory, passed down from parent to child for generations, that's the real proof of how significant she was. The official histories might have ignored her, but the people never, ever forgot. She died in 1603, which, believe it or not, was the very same year as her rival and equal Queen Elizabeth. And it's said that she's buried right here, in the Abbey on Clare Island. That's the same island where her entire story began, which just brings her incredible journey to a perfect full circle. So, at the end of it all, who was she really? A pragmatic survivor? A feminist icon way ahead of her time? Or a ruthless pirate? How should history remember Grace O'Malley? You know, maybe the real answer is that she was all of those things at once. A complex, powerful, unforgettable leader whose story, even centuries later, absolutely captivates us.